Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max. සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න. Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max. සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න.
Nava Dove Healthy Ritual. 4 එකක් moisturizing milk, cornflour සහ coconut oil සමගින්.
හරිම සුදුයි.
On first at 9 tonight, this Tuesday the 6th of December 2022. Rebuilding from scratch. President says he's not interested in bringing reforms to the current economic model.
I personally have no plans for reform, and the government will not have plans for reform. We want to build a new economy that will face 2050.
Quick response. World Bank approves Sri Lanka's request for concessional financing with the International Development Association. Multifaceted assistance. Multilateral institution says Sri Lanka needs a coordinated assistance program to get out of the economic crisis.
I have requested India and China that I'd like to finish restructuring of the debt before the 75th anniversary of independence of Sri Lanka.
Silver lining. Central Bank announces a decline in merchandise exports in October, but says deficit in merchandise trade account narrowed to $285 million in same month.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9 with Andrew Bernard. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very good evening and welcome to AdaDerana 24's English News. Now in your top story for tonight, President Ranil Wickremesinghe asserts that his government is working to build a new economy ready to face the challenges by the year 2050, instead of bringing about reforms to sustain a failed system that would only take the country backwards. Speaking at a summit in Colombo, the head of state added that the challenge lies in thinking unconventionally to explore new opportunities for local industries to compete in the region.
President Ranil Wickremesinghe addressed the 2022 Economic Summit organized by Ceylon Chamber of Commerce on the theme Resetting from Turmoil to Opportunity.
What is the plan for reform? Frankly, I have no plan for reform. I don't know in this crisis the reforms can work. To reform, you must have economy. What do we face in the future? Whatever relief we get from our debtors, multilateral creditors, and also from the private creditors, we have to pay this money back. Then remember, for the next few years, we have to borrow money. Our trade balance is not in our favor. So are we going to rebuild the same structure and come down again much faster? Therefore, I thought it's not worth reforming it. So I personally have no plans for reform, and the government will not have plans for reforms. We want to build a new economy that will face 2050. Is the private sector ready for it? That's the only question I have to ask you. Are we ready for it? Are we going to take up the challenge? Shall we take the pain that comes with it? Or are we going to hide again? What have we got first? We have to earn foreign exchange. Why can't we have a balance of trade? Why can't it be in a surplus? Can you put into a surplus? If not, we can't survive. If you want to survive and you have to compete with the world, then we have to be competitive. Not competitive, we've got to be highly competitive. We've got to join the rest of Asia, we've got to compete with China, we've got to compete with Japan, you've got to compete with Korea, you've got to compete with India. Can we build that? Can we create sectors which are competitive? I'm ready to take that challenge. Are we ready to go to 2050 or do you want to go back to 1950? These are the two options that are available for us. Then we've got to build a highly competitive social market economy. But it must benefit all, not only a few. We talk of renewable energy. I won't talk of renewable energy. I will talk of green hydrogen. That's where the potential lies. We seem to be having an immense surplus of renewable energy which can be turned into green hydrogen. Why don't we develop and become a logistics center? When I last tried to develop the Colombo harbour and tried to give out the East Terminal, there's a big debate as to why I am trying to sell the country. Now we have given the West Terminal out, it's very good. But if you really want to get going, you have to give the East Terminal out. We've given the first choice to Japan. If they don't, we'll ask the others to come in. Colombo port must be the busiest port in South Asia. The small port won't do, so when you get full, we are thinking of expanding the Colombo port all the way to Jahila. A logistics center. Already about 30 acres have been cleared in Colombo North, 20 or 30 acres to start one part of it. There will be more land becoming available. Would connect it and look at Hambantota and Trincomalee. You have the 3 best ports available in the region. Think of logistics, think of green hydrogen, and then modernize the agriculture. Small holding agriculture maybe, modernize the agriculture and get ready for export. It can be done, but it requires high technology. And more than that, the willingness to go ahead. Land must be used to the maximum benefit of the economy and the people. There has to be more changes in the land law, and especially to give land to the smallholders. Otherwise, they will not put the money in. They won't put the effort in. So these are some of the changes you have to make. You have to have a highly competitive manufacturing industry, very highly skilled, semi-automated, maybe automated. All they are necessary. So you've got to think out of the box. You have to look at what you can do. To all this, we require education, high education, school education. We have to become an educational hub. And I must thank all parties in Parliament who agreed, let's open the higher education sector to the private sector and to universities. Let's have that. Now this means, are we ready to think out? There is much more to be done. Are we ready to think out of the box? Are we ready to take the challenge? Are we ready to go forward? That everyone has to think. Private sector has to think. Trade unions, others. We'll all have to get together, and that's why I call the social contract. What do we build and how do we all benefit? So this is the challenge that is there.
Now, Vice President of the Asian Development Bank, Shixin Chen, during discussions with President Ranil Wickremesinghe, highlighted the importance of strengthening macroeconomic management, improving governance and addressing structural constraints. Chen further stated that the ADB is working closely with authorities in the country as well as other development partners to address the immediate needs of the country and plan future assistance. Vice President of the Asian Development Bank, Shixin Chen, met with President Ranil Wickremesinghe yesterday and acknowledged the measures taken to contain the crisis and address its underlying causes and supported the steps taken to seek international assistance. Chen briefed the President on the ADB's emergency response to the crisis, especially in addressing immediate needs such as essential medical supplies, materials for water treatment, fertilizer, and working capital for small and medium-sized enterprises by repurposing from ongoing ADB-funded projects. He further stated that in response to the food situation in the country, the ADB supported the poor and vulnerable of Sri Lanka with direct financial support while boosting livelihood development activities and agricultural production and enhancing social protection systems. The ADB Vice President Chen went on to say that it is deeply concerned about the effects of the ongoing economic crisis on the poor and vulnerable sections, including women of the Sri Lankan society, particularly its long-term impact on people's lives. He added that the ADB is a trusted development partner of Sri Lanka and that they are working closely with authorities as well as other development partners to address immediate needs and plan future assistance. Chen highlighted the need and called for deep, meaningful and sustained structural reforms to address long-standing macroeconomic vulnerabilities, promote private sector development, and to support renewable energy development. Chen underscored the importance of strengthening macroeconomic management, improving governance, addressing structural constraints, and enhancing social protection systems for sustained and inclusive recovery. During his visit, Chen also met with Premier Dinesh Gunawardena, Secretary to the Treasury Mahinda Siriwardena, and Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka Nandalal Veerasinghe. Now, multilateral organizations such as the World Bank, the ADB, the IMF and the AIIB decided during a discussion that took place today that Sri Lanka is in need of a coordinated assistance program to recover from the current economic crisis. President Ranil Wickremesinghe said today during the discussions that while discussions with China and India regarding the debt restructuring process of the country are going smoothly, he has requested both countries to help the island nation complete the process before independence. The World Bank, Asian Development Bank, International Monetary Fund and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank representatives decided that a coordinated assistance program supported by multilateral financial institutions is required for Sri Lanka to recover from the economic crisis the country is currently facing. They reached the agreement following a lengthy round-table discussion held today. with President Ranil Wickremesinghe in Colombo. The President presented the program at the roundtable discussion in his capacity as the Minister of Finance, Economic Stabilization and National Policies. The discussion was held with Vice President of the World Bank Martin Reiser, Vice President of the Asia Development Bank Shixin Shen, IMF Senior Mission Chief Peter Brewer and Dr. Urjit Patel of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, along with the senior officials of those institutions who are currently in Sri Lanka.
I will not deal in detail with the stabilization program that's going on. We started that program, and as far as the restructuring of the debt is concerned, we are having discussions with India and China. So far we have not encountered any difficulty, and I have requested both the countries that I'd like to finish this process before the 75th anniversary of independence of Sri Lanka. From there we can start afresh.
Now, the World Bank granted approval to Sri Lanka's request to access concessional financing from the International Development Association yesterday. The bank stated that this type of financing offered at low interest rates was a result of Sri Lanka's sustained deterioration in economic and social conditions and is expected to facilitate government-led reform program to stabilize the economy. In a media communique, the World Bank stated that approval was granted to a request from Sri Lanka to access concessional financing from the International Development Association. The media release went on to say that this type of financing, which is offered at low interest rates, will enable the country to implement its government-led reform program to stabilize the economy and protect the livelihood of millions of people facing poverty and hunger. It added that this request is the result of Sri Lanka's sustained deterioration in economic and social conditions, which have reduced income levels, reversed poverty gains, and affected its access to financial markets. The World Bank also stated that the approval means Sri Lanka now becomes an international development assistance country and will be subject to IDA operational policies. World Bank Vice President for Development Finance Akihiko Nishio said they are committed to helping Sri Lankan people at this time of dire need so the country turns around and restores economic well-being. He added that the World Bank is ready to support Sri Lanka as it implements reforms that will reduce poverty and rebuild the economy, creating the foundation for sustainable growth. Through IDA support, the World Bank will provide concessional financing and technical assistance. The World Bank further stated that access to the IDA's concessional financing would also alleviate existing debt service pressures given the more favourable terms the IDA financing carries. In response to this, Foreign Minister Ali Sabri expressed Sri Lanka's appreciation to the World Bank's rapid response and its vision as the first development partner to respond in record time through repurposing existing operations to help preserve Sri Lankan institutions for basic service delivery. The Sri Lankan Foreign Minister added that the IDA support will enable the country to access resources to help sustain institutions to become more resilient and responsive to the needs of the people. Meanwhile, the World Bank went on to state that since 2017, Sri Lanka has been creditworthy for lending from the World Bank's International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. To date, in response to the country's crisis, the bank has repurposed $325 million from IBRD and a further $71 million from other regular bank operations towards crisis response for basic service needs. This has also helped leverage support from other multilateral development institutions, bilateral donors, and UN agencies around a common crisis response mechanism. Welcome back. Now, the Cabinet of Ministers have approved the preparation of a bill to establish a Parliamentary Budget Office. The Parliamentary Budget Office is to monitor the financial affairs of the directly obtaining accurate information related to the government's financial control, including income and expenditure. The government nod was also given to a number of other proposals in this week's meeting.
At this week's meeting, the Cabinet of Ministers approved a resolution furnished by the Minister of Environment for the implementation of the National Environmental Action Plan for the period from 2022 to 2030. The Ministry of Environment has prepared the action plan by paying attention to the environmental challenges in the 21st century as well as in line with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. Accordingly, the Cabinet of Ministers approved to take policy decisions at national level regarding the implementation of the National Environmental Action Plan and to establish a consolidated Environment and Development Policy Committee. The Cabinet also approved the proposal on transferring legal powers to maintain the Sri Lanka Navy Hydrological Service at national level. Accordingly, Sri Lanka Navy will be entrusted with the naval and maritime activities within Sri Lankan waters and identical economic zone of Sri Lanka as a non-naval duty. Approval was also granted for the establishment of a National Maritime Office. In the meantime, the Cabinet yesterday approved the proposed bill to amend the Mediation Board Act No. 72 of 1988 to be gazetted and presented in the Parliament thereafter. On the 22nd of November this year, the Cabinet granted approval to introduce new regulations to meet present requirements concerning the appointment of Mediation Board Commission members, determination of Mediation Board jurisdiction and disputes that cannot be settled and filing cases in court concerning such disputes. The Attorney General also approved the bill prepared by the legal draftsman. Meanwhile, the Cabinet gave the green light for preparation of the bill for the establishment of the Parliamentary Budget Office. A preliminary bill for the establishment of the Parliamentary Budget Office was presented by the President at the Cabinet meeting on the 31st of October this year. During the meeting, it was decided to forward the draft bill to all party leaders in Parliament and get their opinion on the matters mentioned. The Prime Minister has thereby made discussions on the preliminary bill with the party leaders, and the ideas presented in the discussion were submitted for the consideration of the Cabinet of Ministers. Accordingly, the Cabinet of Ministers granted approval to prepare a bill based on the preliminary bill, taking into account the comments made by the party leaders. Further, the Cabinet of Ministers gave the nod for a proposal presented by the Minister of Public Security to enter into a Memorandum of Understanding on Immigration between Sri Lanka and the Maldives. It is expected to improve and strengthen cooperation in immigration matters between the two countries in order to achieve the objectives of assisting in frontier control management for mutual benefit, providing mutual facilities for capacity building in HR systems and technology sectors. Further, it is also expected to prevent international crimes such as informal migration, human trafficking, and trade in human beings. Meanwhile, speaking at the Cabinet media briefing today, Cabinet spokesperson Dr. Bandulu Gunawardena stated that the Park and Ride city bus service, which has been inoperational during the past few months, will resume its operations starting from the 15th of January next year.
The Minister of Power and Energy, Kanchana Wijesekara, stresses as a must to revise electricity tariffs as imposed by the Ceylon Electricity Board, despite the heavy opposition to the proposal. Speaking in Parliament today, the Minister added that failure to revise electricity tariffs could result in extended power cuts of 6 to 8 hours during next year.
2023 අවුරුද්දේ විදුලි ඒකකයක් උත්පාදනය කිරීම සඳහා රුපියල් 56.90ක් වැය වෙන බවට තමයි උපකල්පනය කරලා තියෙන්නේ. දැනට අය කරන්නේ 29.14යි රුපියල් 27ක තියෙනවා පරතරයක්. ඒ රුපියල් 27ක පරතරය කියලා කියන්නේ රුපියල් බිලියන 423.5ක් විදුලි බල මණ්ඩලයට ලැබෙන්නේ නැත්නම් අවශ්‍ය ඉන්ධන ටික ගන්න, ගල් අඟුරු ටික ගන්න, දැවි තෙල් ටික ගන්න. එහෙනම් අපි සියලු දෙනා ලෑස්ති වෙන්න ඕන ලබන අවුරුද්ද පැය 6ක 8ක විදුලි කප්පාදුකට යන්න. මහජන උපයෝගිතා කොමිසමට මේ නීත්‍යානුකූල දෙන යෝජනාවක් පැහැර හරින්න කිසිසේත් පුළුවන්කමක් නැහැ.
මහජන උපයෝගිතා කොමිසමේ සභාපති කියනවා මිල වැඩි කිරීමක් අවශ්‍ය නැහැ කියලා. ආණ්ඩුව ඇතුළේ ප්‍රශ්න විසඳන්න. ඊසල් බලාගාරවලට යන වියදම වැඩි කියලා මම පිළිගන්නවා. විදුලි බල මණ්ඩලයේ සතු බලාගාරවල සාමාන්‍යයෙන් රුපියල් 96.46ක් වැය වෙනවා ඒකකයක් උත්පාදනය කරන්න.
Welcome back. The Central Bank of Sri Lanka today announced that the merchandise exports for the month of October declined by $141 million to $1,051 million compared to the same month last year. However, the central bank further stated that the deficit in merchandise trade account had reduced to $295 million in October 2022 compared to the deficit of $502 million recorded in October the same year last time. Earnings from merchandise exports declined in October 2022 on a year-on-year basis to $1,051 million for the first time since March 2022, mainly due to lower earnings from garment exports. The decline in import expenditure also continued in October 2022 on a year-on-year basis for the 8th consecutive month, despite recording an increase compared to September 2022. The merchandise trade deficit recorded a notable contraction in October 2022 compared to the previous year. Meanwhile, the workers' remittances steadied and earnings from tourism improved in October 2022. Earnings from tourism crossed over $1 billion during the time period of January to October this year. Meanwhile, workers' remittances reached about $3 billion during the months of January to October this year as well. Foreign investment in the government securities market and the Colombo Stock Exchange recorded a marginal net inflow during October this year. The central bank continued to provide forex requirement to finance essential imports, exhausting the liquid level of gross official reserves. Meanwhile, the weighted average spot exchange rate in the interbank market remained around 363 rupees per US dollar during the month. The deficit in the merchandise trade account meanwhile narrowed to $285 million in October this year, compared to the deficit of $502 million in October last year. The cumulative deficit in the trade account during the months of January to October this year recorded at $4,389 million, declined from $6,501 million over the same period in 2021. Now, the all-share price index closed in green as a result of price gains in counters such as LOLC Holdings, Brown's Investment and John Keel's Holdings, with the turnover crossing 3.1 billion rupees. The SPI ended at 8,881 points at 37.59 points, while the S&P SL20 closed up at 2,835.66, up by 26.16 points. High net worth and institutional investor participation was noted in Expo Lanka Holdings, John Keel's Holdings and CIC Holdings. Mixed interest meanwhile was observed in Dialog Axiata, Lanka IOC and LOLC Holdings, whilst retail interest was noted in Brown's Investments, LOLC Finance and Maravilla Resorts. Furthermore, foreigners closed as net buyers. Now let's take a look at how the rupee traded against other major currencies in the world. The shares in Asia Pacific sank today as concerns over hawkish Federal Reserve were amplified by stronger than expected economic data. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index was 0.75% lower in the final hour of trade, with the Hang Seng Tech Index declining 2.4%, despite Beijing easing some COVID requirements for the city. Meanwhile, the Shanghai Composite in mainland China closed fractionally higher at 3,212.53 points, and the Shenzhen component was up 0.667% at 1,398.82 points. In Australia, the S&P 200 fell 0.47 points to 7,291.3 points. The Nikkei 225, meanwhile, in Japan, gained 0.24% to 27,885.87 points, and the Topix rose by 0.12% to 1,960.22 points. South Korea's Kospi dropped 1.6% to 2,996.16 points. In the meantime, the MSCI Broad-Based Index of Asia Pacific shares outside Japan was down 1.32%. And that's all the news we have for you this evening. Join us again tomorrow at the very same time for the very latest news. Until then, visit our website www.adaderana.lk for more news. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.
information you can trust 24 hours a day. Visit AdaDerana.lk.